Straight Edges, Chapter 12, Whiffs and Glimpses, or Suffering and Glory. So the question moves from, why would God allow suffering, to, why would God allow my suffering? Any talk about suffering must get personal because suffering is such an intensely personal experience. We talk about sharing sorrow, but even in a sorrow that we share, it doesn't really become our sorrow. It's my sorrow and your sorrow. Suffering is never a group activity. We may suffer the same event, but we'll suffer the same event alone and experience it differently. Suffering is common to all of us. There's no such thing as a life free from suffering, but it's different for every one of us. Now, if this chapter is going to get personal, I'm going to have to talk about my own experiences, limited as they are, and any lessons I've learned from them. Because suffering is different for every one of us, my experiences may not be helpful to anyone else, but they're mine and all I have to talk about, so I will. This chapter is going to be nearly entirely subjective, but for what it's worth, I'll write it. Parts of it might make sense to one other person. All right then, it won't be wasted. When I look back on my life so far, sometimes, just sometimes, it's the painful experiences that stand out to me as having been the most necessary. That's not to say that I welcome them and can't wait for the next one to begin, but how incomplete my life would be without those experiences. How incomplete I would be. Maybe, just maybe, it works like this. We sin, and that's bad. Sin produces results. It produces suffering, and that's neither good nor bad. It's just necessary because of sin. But suffering can produce results too, good results. And that's good. Or at least it can be good. It depends on how it all ends up, perhaps. It depends on what we do with the suffering allotted to us. The first lesson that I'd like to tell you about that I've learned through my own experience of suffering is that it's transient. It doesn't last forever. That's foundational. It's especially foundational to remember in the midst of suffering because it always feels like it's going to go on forever. Happiness recalled is happiness again. Pain recalled is no longer pain. I put that in quotes, but I don't know why, seeing I made it up. It's a little ditty that came to me one day that I'll tell myself sometimes. What on earth does it mean? I've noticed that I get twice the mileage of happiness out of a happy memory. A happy memory has the ability to make me happy all over again, thereby doubling the happiness. Or maybe even tripling it, seeing a happy memory might be twice as sweet the second time around. But I've noticed that, for me at least, painful memories lose their potency once the pain is past. This is not necessarily so if there's still a chance that particular pain may recur. Then those painful memories can bring pain in the form of fear. But if the pain is gone and there's no chance of that particular pain ever happening again, then there's no fear, and somehow there's even no power to hurt left in the memory. In fact, there can almost be a kind of pleasure, a relief to remember that I never have to experience that pain again. Take, for instance, the time my dentist was out of town for a week when my tooth abscessed. A week-long abscessed tooth was not a pleasant experience at the time, I know that for sure. But there's no pain in the memory. That's all over and done with. Or when I sprained my ankle badly a few weeks ago, I lay on the ground groaning for about 10 minutes right after I did it. I know it wasn't a happy time for me, but there's no pain in that memory. I should qualify this by saying that there are pains that haven't left me yet, certain losses or wounds that might always be with me. Time subdues much of the sharpness of the original sting, but still there's pain there. But these are not just painful memories, they are present pain. The loss or other repercussions of the painful events are still there. When I talk about pain that's in the past, I mean pain that has stopped being pain. Painful experiences that I never have to relive. Because of these transient pain experiences, I have hope that maybe all pain is transient. Some pains may just take the rest of this life to stop being pain. I don't know if anyone else has found my experience of retroactive pleasure and non-retroactive pain to be true, but that's what I've noticed for myself that leads me to believe that no matter how big and huge and powerful pain and evil is in the here and now, how one drop of it seems to contaminate all the good it's mixed with. On that final scale, when all is said and done, the side holding all the good I've ever enjoyed will plummet to the earth with its weight, making the suffering look like nothing. Because good, happiness, joy has staying power. Pain doesn't. I was lying in bed this morning listening to the kettle whistling and birds singing outside the window with nothing to dread and everything to look forward to, with happiness flooding me, thinking about these things. Again, maybe that's why I can write now about the permanence of joy and the transience of pain. I'm really not so philosophical at all when I'm in pain. But that's my point. I'm not in pain now. I have been in the past. I'm not now. It doesn't last forever. The bad stuff doesn't, but it seems to me that the good stuff may. The sound of the kettle and the birds and the lying in bed recalled memories hidden below my consciousness that could fill me with the same delight and sense of all-round well-being as if those memories were happening all over again. Well, really, they were. And that's what I mean. Happiness compounds, pain dissipates. But as I was lying in bed thinking about it, I had to stipulate. Pain doesn't have to last forever, but there are some pains that can if we choose. I know people, and have been one of them, who can hang on to painful memories and relive the pain over and over anytime they want to, even though there doesn't need to be any pain left in them. But interestingly, those kinds of memories are never just about pain, pure and simple, like my abscessed tooth or my sprained ankle. These kinds of memories we almost enjoy remembering, as long as we can pat ourselves on the back about how strong and brave we were. The kinds of memories that can still hurt us are the kinds where someone hurt us. They're the kinds of memories where not just simple suffering was involved, but sin was involved. But there's a secret ingredient that turns those kinds of memories into the kind where they have no power to hurt anymore, and that key ingredient is forgiveness. I don't have a very good handle on forgiveness, what it is or how to do it, so I won't say much on the subject here. I bring forgiveness up just to say this. These are the first 2 lessons I'd like to mention that I've discovered through pain. It doesn't have to last forever, and that's possible because of forgiveness. This comes into play later when we talk about the solution. Our sin does not have to cause God pain forever because He can forgive it. This is one of those ways in which it can be a good thing for us to learn to be like God. In fact, learning the art of forgiveness may be one of those good results that suffering brings. Because it doesn't last forever, and because once it's over, it's really over, we can see how it's possible that suffering may actually turn out to work very good results in us. But just knowing that it won't last forever doesn't automatically mean that it's a good thing or that it produces good results either. So let's get specific and talk about some of the good results I've seen through my own experiences with this subject. For some reason, as I'm thinking right now about the suffering I've experienced, the first thing that comes to my mind is the suffering that's self-inflicted. Of all my painful experiences, living with myself is the top of my list today. It's just so horribly day in, day out, and there's no escape. Truly, I am my own worst enemy. On the one hand, there's the suffering that I inflict on myself and others because of my sin. I hate that. But on the other hand, there's the suffering I inflict on myself just by being myself. I have to confess to you that I have what, for lack of a better term, I'll call the artistic temperament. Sometimes it seems like a great misfortune, but there it is. I've got it, and I can't get rid of it. I've lived through some of the typical big things. Broken home, broken heart, the death of a loved one, homesickness, culture shock, job loss, prolonged unemployment, being flat broke. I think I dealt with the big things like a normal person. I don't mean I sailed through them. I mean, these things are hard for everyone. What I don't seem capable of dealing with like a normal person are all the little things, the normal conflicts and tensions and rubs of being human and living amongst humans. What I'm trying to say is that I'm a gigantic wimp. Even small amounts of pain can seem so big and painful to me. Why do little things seem to lose all proportion for me? Why do I get hold of a thought I'd really rather not think and tumble it round and round in my mind and worry it like a dog worrying a bone and seem so unable to leave it alone and get on with life? I've come to the conclusion it's because of my artistic temperament. Making this claim for myself is not bragging, believe me. I have all the temperament and none of the talent. I've known others with the artistic temperament, and I have to tell you that I'm a little bit sorry to have to admit to being one of them. It's nothing to brag about. In fact, usually, artistic temperament is just a polite way of describing someone hard to be around. But there is something to be said for artistic temperaments. They often belong to artists. I mean, maybe there are those artists who can have an altercation with a taxi driver or deal with an irate customer, let it all run off them like water off a duck's back, and go home to paint masterpieces or compose symphonies. But I think they must be very rare. Most artists seem to be, well, a little different. I think it's because they look at the world a little differently. Often artistic talent accompanies artistic temperament. For myself, although I didn't get any of the typical talent, I do know that my world looks a little different from anyone else's. That's a given, isn't it? Isn't that what we ended up deciding in Chapter 4? Every individual's world looks a little different from everyone else's. My world has a slightly different flavor and fragrance than yours does, and vice versa. And I know that, in spite of my artistic temperament, there's a beauty to my world that would be lost to me if I were someone other than who I am. But maybe it's not in spite of, maybe it's because of. Maybe it's because little things can really get to me, little things can really affect me negatively, that little things can really get to me, little things can really affect me positively. Maybe it's because my lows are so low that my highs are so high. When I'm sick to death of myself and my quirks, I have to ask myself, would you really want to be someone else then? Would you want to stop being you? Would you give up the good to get rid of the bad? And the answer I always come back to is, no, I want to be me. I guess I'll have to keep the whole package. There's a sensation very common to me that I don't know how to describe or even name that is a big part of the particular flavor and fragrance of my world. In his book, Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis describes it and gives it the name joy. But it is different from what we mean when we ordinarily use the word. These feelings of joy, in the C.S. Lewis sense, are those sensations of indescribable delight and beauty that come upon us when we're least expecting them. It's these feelings I was talking about when I was telling you how I was lying in bed listening to the kettle and the birds. Trying to capture those feelings and hang on to them is like trying to catch smoke in a cup. They're elusive and momentary, though gigantic, and they make life worth living. But when I've tried to discuss them with my normal, non-artistic temperament, non-neurotic type friends, they look at me blankly. The only people I've run across who have any clue what I'm talking about are, well, a little different too. It's probably no coincidence that many of the people who seem to recognize this feeling I'm talking about are artists or poets. These feelings show up often in poetry. They're probably the reason people find themselves compelled to write poetry. In The Grasshopper and Cricket, Keats called it the poetry of earth. Robert Louis Stevenson called it glory when he wrote, "Sing me a song of a lad that is gone. Say, could that lad be I? Merry of soul, he sailed on a day over the sea to sky. Mull was astern, rum on the port, egg on the starboard bow. Glory of youth glowed in his soul. Where is that glory now?" I believe in Stevenson's glory we find C.S. Lewis's joy and Keats' poetry of earth. My personal favorite poet, Wordsworth, also calls it glory in Ode on Intimations of Immortality. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem, apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is now as it hath been of yore, turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day. The things which I have seen I now can see no more. The rainbow comes and goes, and lovely is the rose. The moon doth with delight look round her when the heavens are bare. Waters on a starry night are beautiful and fair. The sunshine is a glorious birth. But yet I know, where'er I go, that there hath passed away a glory from the earth. Sadly, both the poems quoted are about losing that sense of glory as adults, which was so strong with us as kids. Maybe all kids are blessed with artistic temperament. Didn't little things seem huge to us as kids, either for good or ill? Maybe my non-neurotic friends who look at me blankly when I start rambling on about joy and glory have grown up, and that's the problem. Maybe we do all know these feelings of glory, but some of us have forgotten. I think that's the term I like best for this lovely intangible. Glory. Or maybe it would be more accurate to say these feelings, these enormous pinpricks of bliss, are only whiffs and glimpses of glory, not the thing itself. It does almost seem as though for a moment there's a hint of the most beautiful aroma wafting in on a breeze, or as though this same breeze has blown back a curtain for an instant, revealing a sight too beautiful to describe. I think this fragrance wafting in and this sight behind the curtain are the glory. The feelings are just the whiffs and glimpses. We could blame it on nostalgia. We could say it's just the happiness of an unremembered happy memory prodding us from the back of the subconscious. But I don't think that explains it very fully. These whiffs and glimpses involve happy memories, I don't doubt it. My singing kettle and the singing birds doubtless harked back to some earlier memory. But if that feeling is just a subconscious remembrance of some other time I felt that feeling, then where did that feeling come from that other time that I'm remembering, or unremembering, as the case may be? If we trace that recalled happiness back to another memory, then where did the happiness or the glory in that memory come from? It seems to me that if we think we can trace it back and discover its source, we'll find that what we thought was the source is only a mirage. What we expected to be the source of the river was ever only another bend in it around which we still expect to find the source. We don't have explanations for this experience in earthly terms. Why should kettles and birds hold such happiness for me? The feeling of glory must lie outside and be bigger than the thing itself that conveys the feeling to us. It's bigger than birds and kettles. At any rate, all that was not really the point I wanted to make about my whiffs and glimpses. The point I set out to make all those paragraphs ago was simply this. I believe glory is linked to suffering in some inextricable way. I believe my world looks the way it does because of the way I am. I believe I get those whiffs and glimpses of glory because of the suffering I experience. It's this artistic temperament of mine that can make my world look very dark at times, that can also make it look so very bright and shiny and laden with glory. And I'm not really sure that one is possible without the other. I'm not very sure that we could have glory at no cost. That's the conclusion I've come to about me. I am a package deal. If I don't like my sensitivity to pain and would rid myself of that quality, I would also have to rid myself of my sensitivity to beauty. Wanting to keep the one without the other is like wishing I was a bird except without the flying because I don't like heights. Or wishing I was a fish except without the swimming because I don't like water. But it doesn't work that way. That's not the way things are. And maybe, just maybe, it's a principle of the way things are that you can't have glory without the suffering. I like what Madeleine L'Engle wrote in A Wrinkle in Time about the planet where no one was ever unhappy. But nobody's ever happy either, Meg said earnestly. Maybe if you aren't unhappy sometimes, you don't know how to be happy. We do see this as a reality in our reality in some ways. Beauty is not beauty without contrast. In a landscape or a face, it's the dark offsetting the bright. It's the smooth offsetting the rough. It's the round offsetting the angular that makes up beauty. A canvas painted a solid orange or a solid yellow or a solid anything is not a thing of particular beauty. In music, it's the highs and the lows taken together that make a melody. A song of one note would not be much of a song. If every day were Christmas, no day would be Christmas. If everyone were beautiful, no one would be beautiful. If everyone won first prize, no one would win first prize. And I'm also tempted to think that if everything was a pleasure, we would hold pleasure much more cheaply. How could we be the kind of people who could know the true pleasure of pleasure? We'd be incomplete. I have to say honestly that looking back over my life so far, I can dimly see that it is this curious blend of all the pain and all the pleasure that lends it the depth and the beauty and the meaning that I feel it to have in certain moods. If all the pains were chopped out, my life would seem shallow and empty. Speaking of beautiful people and first prizes, we tend to think of the beautiful people and those who win first prize as the lucky ones, but maybe it's the opposite. I'm tempted to think so when I look at the people and their lives that our society calls beautiful and that our society hands all the first prizes to. They're missing out on the character building that comes from not being beautiful and not winning first prize. Unless a person has a little of that kind of character worked into them, they'll never be the kind of person who can appreciate beauty or success. Glory and suffering and glory through suffering are deep philosophical waters away over my head that I'm in, and they may not make a great deal of sense to you, yet the Bible does give us clues that, although there is some sort of unbreakable link between suffering and sin, then because of the sin and suffering that is part of our reality, so now there is some sort of unbreakable link between suffering and glory, however little we may be able to understand it. See 2 Corinthians 4:17 and Romans 8:18. Somehow God does the work of making us able to bear glory by making us bear suffering. I don't know how it works, but I'm told it does, and I've seen a little of it from my own experience. Now, all this philosophizing might be all very well. It might be a nice thought to think that suffering is going to end someday and in the meantime is working out some good result. But that's all someday. If I were right in the midst of some suffering or other right now, except the daily suffering of my artistic temperament, it might not seem very helpful. I'm not going through any particularly hard time at the minute. Right now is one of those sunshiny times for me. But a day or two ago I stumbled across the pages of an old journal, written when I was going through a rough patch. This is what I had to say then. So how do we come to terms with that? The fact that God does, most emphatically does, allow more pain than we think can be stood. I need to leave that question mark hanging in the air for a bit. Pat answers are not good salve to open sores. At least I know that any answer I find at the moment is not going to be pat. I am one giant sore at the moment, so I'm not overly wanting to find a pat answer. I want real answers born out of real pain and real need. And that is what I find. The only answer is that God doesn't do things the way we would do them because He isn't us, and we're not Him. We don't have perfect wisdom. We don't see the end from the beginning. We see only our little inch in the galaxy, and that is part of the pain that presumably is working out all that good in our lives. The fact that we're left in the dark, left without knowledge of the whys and wherefores. If we knew all the whys, where would be the need for faith? And that faith, that freely given love and worship, that feeble clinging on in the midst of huge doubts and uncertainty, is infinitely precious to God. So precious that He allows unimaginable pain in the lives of those He loves, so that their precious faith can be refined. He allows the things that they were clinging to, thinking they were clinging to God, to be burnt up and that one tiny nugget of true faith to stand. So how could a loving and merciful God allow things that we wouldn't because we think we're too loving and merciful to allow them? Because He sees the end from the beginning? Because He weighs things out on a different scale? He weighs the cost of the pain against the price of the good that will come from it and finds the good worth the pain. That's really the only answer. He allows it because it's worth it. If you right now are stuck in the middle of somewhere and something you don't want to be stuck in, all I can really tell you is that the only way for you to know what good purpose God wants to make happen through your pain is for you to ask Him. You may not get the answer all at once or completely. You may never in this life get an answer, but you can be sure that if you let Him, whether or not you realize it, He will be working out some good result in your life. No pain is too great for God to use. You don't have to take my word for it, and I would have no authority to talk about great pain anyway. Check out books like Concentration Camp Survivor, Corrie ten Boom's The Hiding Place. Check out the Bible through the stories of Job or Joseph or Jesus. I can't even begin to imagine going through what these people went through and coming out the other side, somehow still with a faith in God, somehow still managing to say that God is a good God. The horrific things God allows His people to go through and still allows them to praise Him through convince me that there is no suffering so great He can't somehow turn it around to do a perfect work in those who let Him. There's no suffering so great which God allows that we could ever be justified to spit in God's face for allowing it. Or if you're in the middle of some fierce bout of suffering at the moment, even if you do spit in His face, don't ignore Him. Don't shut Him out. Spitting in His face may be the natural reaction. He's had His face spit in before and forgiven it. It's not the unforgivable sin, it can be cured. The sin there's no cure for is a complete and final disregard of Him, a complete and final denial of any need for Him. There's no cure for that sin because we won't let Him cure it. It's my sneaking suspicion He'd rather have His face spit in than be ignored because there's more hope for the angry than the indifferent. Maybe on some occasions suffering is His way of trying to shake us out of that self-satisfied state where we acknowledge no need. Remember our old enemy? It's called pride. And pride and suffering don't coexist peacefully, easily. It's impossible for me to write about suffering without sounding trite, especially when I know as little about it as I do. That's why I referred you to those experts I mentioned earlier. When you read their experiences, you'll know there's nothing trite about them, but all the same, they say the same things that I can affirm with my very limited experience. Not that anyone likes or seeks or would even choose those times of suffering beforehand. Pain is pain, and knowing that God will do good things through it, it may only help slightly at the time. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said once somewhere something like, "It's not that we doubt God will do what's best, it's that we wonder how much that best is going to hurt." And when we hurt, we cry out. We stamp and rage and beat on the doors of heaven. That's okay. God can handle it. Read the Psalms if you think God's not okay with our being honest with him in the midst of pain. Pain is pain, and pain is pain for God too. Don't ever think that your pain is not his pain. Read the Bible if you doubt it. That message threads its way throughout the whole book. God's heart breaks for our pain. But he's no wimp. Maybe it comes down to the question, what is God's greatest desire for us? To see us happy? Well, yes, in a sense. I believe God's greatest desire for us is that we would know him. He is the all-relational one. And that knowing is the only true, lasting, ultimate happiness possible. So, yes, God's greatest desire for us is to see us happy, because if he sees us truly happy, it's because we know him. And that's his greatest desire for us. Is it his greatest desire for us to keep us from all pain? Obviously not. Keeping us from all pain could be the very thing to defeat his greatest desire for us. Keeping us from all pain could be the thing that keeps us from our ultimate happiness. Keeping us from all pain could be the thing that keeps us from knowing him. Again, all I'm saying here may or may not be helpful to you. The only truly helpful thing I could tell you if you're in the middle of one of those painful times right now is to turn to him. He may not give you answers, but he will give you himself, which will help you more than any answer could. It may seem that himself is the very thing he withholds at those times. It may seem as though those are the times he's the most distant. He may be silent. Even those closest to him, Job, David, Jesus, cried out in those times and expressed their experiences of, my God, why have you forsaken me?" His silence in itself seems to be the form of suffering that makes the others hardest to bear. But in those times when our faith may seem to be the weakest, I believe it's really the truest and most precious to him. It's very easy to believe in God when his presence is obvious to us and all is well, but to go on believing when it's not obvious at all and the doubts almost swamp us, those are the times when he will really give us himself. Not all at once perhaps, but he will. I can tell you he can and does use those times like no others. I just can't exactly explain to you how or why. In anything I've ever suffered and learned through, that is the main and best lesson I could tell you about. God became more to me. I learned to know him better. He gave me more of himself through my times of suffering, and that is glory. Endnote. This chapter raises questions that are too big to be explored here. For defense of the idea that glory is inextricably linked to suffering, Revelation 13 verse 8 says, "The Lamb was slain from the foundation of the world." From the beginning, before sin had entered the world, God, living in eternity and knowing how the story would go, has always known the glory that would come about through suffering. There are no ifs for God, no plan B.